So in the Stanford course, you're not just learning the steps and figures, right? You're also learning the history and the ideas behind each form. Today, there is a strong core of people who love social dancing. As you know, that's why this picture here. And it's not really a large percentage of the world's population, but their enthusiasm is high. And there are enough like-minded social dancers, enough to fill a room, like at Jamix or at Friday Night Waltz. Or this is Northwest Dance Network in Seattle. Or the Avalon Ballroom, this is Boulder, Colorado, Glen Echo Ballroom near Washington, D.C., and elsewhere. And it was the same thing back in the 1950s and 60s. But as you remember, the mainstream trend in the 1950s, that was adults settling down and raising a boom of babies, not dancing. And then came the twist and the solo dancing of the 1960s. So those were the mainstream trends, but there was always a strong core of people who loved partner social dancing all along, just like today, that minority. In 1950, Laorray Haile from Southern California, then Tucson, Arizona, she compiled this description of swing steps and variations. And what was notable about this is that she compiled everything that was being done in swing, from Lindy to Jitterbug to regional variations there. And she noted the Eastern style and the Western style of many of them. So her influence on West Coast swing that would develop in another 25 years, it isn't what you might think. So one might see the terms whip and sugar push here and think, early West Coast swing. No, those are just names. And some of the figures described aren't really very close to the West Coast swing versions. No, the influence here is the inclusiveness, describing all kinds of swing. If you like swing dancing, you liked all of it, and you were eager to incorporate more steps and styles into your swing dancing. So let's skip forward to the 1970s. Skippy Blair was a friend of Laorray Haile, and Skippy also loved all of swing dancing, actually all of social dancing. And since she was living in Los Angeles, she enjoyed being at the forefront of a new social dances, a new family of them that were rapidly developing during the disco 70s. She wrote up these dance descriptions for the workshops that she taught throughout the 70s. This one's from 1974. Then she compiled them all, along with the latest new developments in her 1978 book, Disco to Tango and Back. I brought Skippy to Stanford to teach at the 2006 Stanford Dance Week at the age of 82. This is her at 82. And there she is in the center of our group shot. Her 1978 book was notable for including the first description of West Coast swing. Can you see at the top, she also called it Golden State Swing, meaning California swing. She also introduced Buddy Schwimmer's nightclub two-step. She just called it two-step at that time in that same book. And that's a young Buddy Schwimmer on the left. So here's where Laorray Haile's 1950s compilation of swing dancing comes in. Skippy Blair included all of swing dancing as possible elements to borrow from in West Coast swing. If you retain the concept of the slot and the connection to the anchor step and the easygoing walking style. Now, I don't know if you remember, you heard me quote her before at the beginning of the quarter, but hearing it again now might have more significance than it did in our first week of classes. Skippy wrote, "The most fascinating part of swing dancing is the individuality of the dancers. Stylings are flexible. The style one chooses should be as individual as the clothes one chooses to wear. The only problem that exists in swing is when someone decides there is only one way," she capitalized one way, "only one way to dance it." So the first generation of swing dance teachers all emphasized the flexibility, the adaptability, the creativity of West Coast swing. That's what defines it. But ironically, a significant number of second generation West Coast swing teachers, they went in the opposite direction from that original attitude. So here's what happened. At first, there were only a few teachers who knew West Coast swing and many students. But as those students got better and won competitions, many of them became teachers, many of them. And soon there was a surplus of teachers. And as this supply and demand ratio reversed, they needed to convince prospective students that they were better than all of those other teachers. And how do you do that? You use basic human psychology. Most people like to think that there's only one correct way to do something, whether it's true or not. They like to think that. And they're usually drawn to the teacher who says they know the only right way to dance. Then, in the second stage of this one-upmanship, some teachers started telling their students that the other teachers were doing it wrong. Then, third, students are also attracted to the newest thing, right? To be current. So some teachers then started saying that the versions that they didn't teach, those were outdated. Hey, that works in the battle to be top dog. Fourth, some started to overspecify the terminology. For example, in her original description of West Coast swing, Skippy Blair used both the terms sugar push and push break. She used both for the same figure as synonymous. And then she concluded that chapter in her book by settling in on the term sugar push. But both terms have been used synonymously for decades, most often as sugar push. So how's the teacher try to say that they know better than everybody else? Well, today in the competition to be top dog, you can now hear a teacher say, the correct term is push break. Sugar push is when you use swiveling sugarfoot steps from Lindy Hop. Really? Actually, that's not true. We historians know that the earliest description of sugar push is in Laorray Haile's book, clearly described, and there was no swiveling footwork. Sugar push was a sweet move, meaning that connection felt sweet. So the word sugar happened to be used again decades after the Lindy Hop sugar foot, a coincidence of a rather obvious word, sugar. And finally, dance teachers know that most students are impressed by highly specified technique. It just seems more advanced. Compared to that, a teacher who describes several different ways of doing a step or several different ways of leading or following a figure, that actually kind of sounds sloppy. It sounds imprecise compared to the overspecification. So much for Skippy's founding principle of West Coast swing. The only problem that exists in swing is when someone decides there's only one way to do it. You know, it's funny, at one of the West Coast swing dance classes at Boogie by the Bay, a teacher's opening remark was, everything you know about West Coast swing is wrong. He actually said that. And they just set out to prove that he knew better than anybody else, that he was better than all of the other teachers. And most instructors aren't quite that blatant, but it's still a common problem. So this is why this is a real problem. Personally, I don't care who's top dog as the teachers battle for supremacy, but there are three real problems with overspecifying something that actually isn't one specific way. It mostly hurts the follows. Most dance students go to just one teacher, right? They learn just one style. And if their teacher overspecifies exactly how each figure is performed and led and followed, then the follower is expecting exactly that signal. This is functional if they only dance with students from that one teacher. But when they go out dancing elsewhere and encounter a different lead, they're constantly thrown off guard when the signals aren't the one and only version that they're expecting. And when this happens, both the physical and the mental connection are broken. Then, in a different but related point, I think you can always tell when a teacher is only talking to the men, only focusing on the men in the class. And yes, I'm intentionally using the gendered term because this next point is a gender issue. It's when he, and usually it's a male teacher, says there's only one correct way to do it. Men especially like to hear that. Going back centuries, men in general, with exceptions, men have tended to enjoy feeling superior to others, knowing the one and only best way to do something. And in the past, they like to feel in control of their partners, instead of adapting to the partner's differences. So overspecification, it caters to this. Fortunately, we don't see so much of that in our friendly, intelligent, and social Bay Area dance community. But some teachers still cater to that outdated mindset, and they overspecify details that need not be specified. Then I mentioned 3, there's a third problem at the social level for both leads and follows. If you believe that only one version of every detail is correct and all the other versions are wrong or outdated, you can help, but think that your current partner, when you go out dancing, is inexperienced or they're incompetent, when actually they simply learned a different style. It's much harder to be open-minded and non-judgmental if you've been trained that only one way is correct. So what do you do with all of this information I'm telling you? I am not telling you to avoid this kind of teacher. No, I support anyone who has devoted such a large part of their life to teaching social dancing. They're doing a good thing. I'm just saying that if you ever encounter this competitive one-upmanship and this overspecification, just be aware of what's going on while still supporting that teacher. Learn what you can learn from them, but then be ready for anything in the real world. But notice that I only said that some teachers are that way, competitive and judgmental and overly specific. Many are not. And my favorite teachers both understand and they teach the original and the continued spirit of West Coast swing. They teach flexibility. They teach adaptability. They mention several versions of the figures and styles and partnering that you might encounter out there and how to make it work and be fun with someone who has a different style from your own. That was the original spirit of West Coast swing, and that continues to be so today.